Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina, I'm the host here. And my guest today comes from South Africa, Khensani. And I'll ask you to say your last name because I'm going to butcher it. I just know it.
Yeah, no stress. I'm Khensani Mohlatlole.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Very excited.
So I spotted you on Instagram and I mean, it was like immediately, I saw that dress that you were embroidering and I was like, oh my God. It was just something so beautiful. And and then I started scrolling through your Instagram and you talked about slow fashion, you talked about sustainability, you talked about how when you buy the ready-made clothes, you treat it as a whip. And to me, that was like really interesting concept. So I want you to tell me your story, how you, when it all started, when did you become a fiber artist? When did you learn to embroider?
That's a good question. I think so. I mean, like as a kid, I was always interested in clothing and stuff, but sometime when I was in high school, my one aunt taught me to crochet. And I think I'd wanted to do it for like a school project or something like that. Um, and then my one friend, she's oh my god, she's actually still a really amazing embroiderer. And I learned about embroidery through her, and she would show me. I didn't do it at the time because I was very overwhelmed with like the time it takes and the skill and the precision. But then I went to fashion school for a bit, started learning to sew, got a more intimate understanding. And then actually I like stopped working in fashion or anything for a very long time. And then the pandemic happened and I had all that time to just start picking up like old hobbies and stuff. And then, yeah, I got really, really into sewing and crocheting. But this was actually like my first proper embroidery project. Actually, I've never really been much of an embroiderer just because I'm very impatient. So it's a bit of a learning curve there. But yeah, so I guess I'll say like, I'm gonna say like I've been properly like into like fiber arts and crafts like since the pandemic.
Well, you also call yourself on Instagram an aspiring costume historian. What was that interest like? When did that interest spike?
That's also another one from the pandemic. um, Cause yeah, again, I had a lot of time to start reading, and yeah, that was the time I was picking up like crocheting and sewing again, and then I don't know how one day I just ended up on like fashion history YouTube, and I came across all these really cool people who were finding really interesting ways to like blend like clothing and design with history and like politics and like anthropology, which is something I've always been interested in. I've always said like I love history because I'm very nosy. I love other people's business. um, so like fashion history is an even better way because you like not just in people's business, but you're like this like you get to be a detective and think about like what they wore and why and what it meant at the time and stuff like that.
Tell me like the first time you went into that investigation, because like I watched few of your reels and it was interesting to see that like you inspired by some paintings or like, and you don't have all the information, but you investigate. So tell me, like, give me one example of that kind of investigation.
I mean, actually, the first one is so like a while ago, I was very interested in. I was trying to figure out like the roots of like my traditional clothing. So my father is Bedi and my mother is Tsonga. These are both two ethnic groups from like northeastern South Africa. So they're both from Limpopo. Um, and the sort of traditional dress we'd wear for like a wedding or any sort of ceremonies and stuff, it's a lot of these like very bright, colorful stuff. So lots of like pinks and purples and blues. And then there's also a lot of what was I say? There's a lot of these motifs I noticed. Like there's a lot of like puffy shoulders, very big voluminous skirts, quite modest as well. And I was like, that looks kind of Victorian to me, actually. And then it just got me wondering, like, where does that actually come from? Is this how like our ancestors were dressing maybe 100 years ago or further? How much of this was because of an interaction with colonialism? One of my friends, actually, she's also Tonga. She does like botanical dyes and textile art. And she does a lot of really great research. And she was talking to me about how also this like our perception now of like our cultural dress is very colorful. But she made me realize that if you had to think realistically, like if in the 1600s or something like that, if everyone is getting all their dyes from like the plants and stuff around them, a lot of these colors we see wouldn't have been possible. Like color palette would have been very different. So that's 100% because of like either technology or colonialism or some sort of trade. And then yeah, that was just me just trying to figure out, because also there's not a lot of documented information on this. There's not a lot of pictures. I haven't been able to find any very extensive like books on it. I think I found like a few papers here and there, but nothing that ever really goes further back than like maybe at best like the 1900s. So it's still kind of an ongoing thing, but I just was like, I'm just going to work with kind of what I know and what I have available and, move from there.
You have a favorite project that you've done that was like really close to your heart?
I think it was that one. Because with that one, it was really fun because I got to spend, I used it as a good excuse to just talk to my parents about like what they knew of their culture. So stuff like learning that like our family totem is an elephant, which I had never thought to ask about before. And then just also learning about sort of like traditional Tonga embroidery styles, and then also going to my mom to talk to me about some of the like folklore and the mythology and the certain symbols. And then also I really loved my grandmother when she's still alive, so she had this beautiful garden in Limpopo, which is kind of like almost a desert environment, but she was like growing oranges and a lot of marula trees, and we had like these beautiful rose bushes and stuff. So I also put a lot of that in there, and it just was like really nice. Like I was thinking about her the whole time I was doing it, because I mean it took a really long time, so I had a lot of time to think. And also I was also just coming to terms with like not feeling so guilty anymore about not feeling like about feeling westernized or feeling like there's too much of a Western influence. It's just a part of the world. It's not a thing to feel negative about. It's just it is what it is, and it's what's empowering is the way that I make that something that's my own, like the way I take that for myself. And for me, it was blending in all these elements, but like, like I love the internet. I love taking fit pics. So, I love being in this generation and stuff. So yeah, I think that was probably like my favorite.
Well, let's talk about that red dress that you embroidered. And you're saying that it was like a lot of hours to think. How did you plan it? Was it sort of design as you go, or did you pre-plan what you're gonna embroider on it?
Yeah, so first I started with just I drew out like all the shapes I knew I wanted. So part of it was like I wanted some indigenous flowers, so I wanted to do these flame lilies and desert roses. And then also there's a lot of like folklore about crocodiles, so I wanted to include those as well. So I did a lot of sketches first on paper, but when it came to actually embroidering the fabric, I kind of was just vibing. I was just like, yeah, here seems like a good place. I'm not a really good planner. I'm very much like I just let things go as they do. But I did sort of plan in terms of like how much time I would allow myself every day to do it. So like on the weekends, I would spend like Saturday morning to Sunday night I'm embroidering, and then during the week I'd give myself like 2 hours every night. And then yeah, I had a plan like, okay, I want to be 50% done with the front panel by this time, etc. But yeah, I was kind of just vibing.
Well, you're saying that you're not a patient person. Do you think that, and I ask knitters that often because like people who knit, they say, oh, I get this comment all the time. I wish I had your patience. And I find myself very impatient in general. And I feel like knitting gives me patience. Do you feel the same way about the embroidery? Do you find your patience in embroidery?
Yeah, it actually taught me a lot. I feel like it's actually very cool because I feel like I've always rushed a lot of projects, because I love results, and with this project, because it was just something, there was no way I could like cheat the amount of time it was gonna take. Like it just taught me like the value in doing something slowly, because I also had the time to do it properly as well. Because I mean, I have a lot of projects which I love, but like there's so many times I have to mend something over and over again, because the first time I did it, I wasn't really practicing any care. And it just also made me realize that if I'm going to invest so much of my time and my effort and my labor into something, it's worth giving it the room and the space to do it. It's worth just taking my time and thinking things through, because that's also just showing respect and like appreciation and gratitude to like myself as a maker and what I'm making and what I'm putting out into the world. Like it's very deserving of that. So that's, yeah, it was a good lesson in just like slowing down and that good things take time and, not everything has to be instant.
Well, let's talk about the whole slow fashion movement, because it used to be in the early ages, right? Like every dress, every costume was made to the person, to fit the person specifically
Mm,
for them. And then we went into the whole fast fashion where like ready-made clothes, right? And you are coming from the generation that has been used for the ready-made clothes for centuries at this point.
mm.
And yet you're trying to bring it back to like use the ready-made clothes as your whip. Talk to me
Yeah.
a little bit about how that philosophy was born.
So the funny thing is, I always think it's very funny because the way my parents grew up, like they're very, because they didn't grow up very rich, obviously. It was like apartheid and stuff. But so every item they had was extremely valuable to them. Like they would cherish it. They invested, especially when it came to clothing, because appearance obviously is so important when you live in a very like oppressive society. So it was really important to them that everything they wear looked good, was like well taken care of. They wouldn't let something like get a hole, etc. They understood the value of like spending a lot of money on an item because you were gonna have it for so long. Um, and I didn't necessarily grow up with that. When I grew up, like, you could go buy a shirt for like 30 Rand, which I think is like the equivalent of less than $1 American, you
Right.
know? And you could buy a lot of stuff very quickly. And it was when I was getting older, and then you start learning about sort of like the environment and stuff. And then also just looking at sort of, there's sort of like a kind of spiritual, cultural aspect to it. This idea of like, or that I've always grown up with, is that like resources are precious. And it's funny because my parents don't even think of themselves as like environmentalists, but they are very like, they're super water efficient. They don't let anything go to waste. Like my dad like keeps a bucket in the shower for like when he's waiting for the water to heat up, and then he'll use it for something else, because he's just like, you can't like waste water, not only because of like the actual expense, but like this is something the earth has given us, and in order to show our gratitude, we have to use it wisely. Um, and that's sort of my entry point, is like I grew up in this culture where like, the other thing is also, if you value the people around you, if you have a real sense of community and ubuntu, like you'll treasure the things other people make. So it makes sense that if some other person has made a garment for you and they've spent time and effort doing that, like your part is also to treat that garment with care and to respect it and invest in it.
You feel like because you studied through costume, it helps you find like your place in the society and like understand where the whole history of South Africa, because it's a complicated history, and there is so many different nations combined in that one country that, I mean, it's almost like a little bit like in America in sense of like melting pot, because like I have so many friends that come from completely different backgrounds into South Africa. Do you feel like you study that through costume?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Also, I think it's very funny you mentioned that it's kind of like America, because I would say that's the closest like comparison in terms of very rough history, but there's also like so much diversity, and there's so many different things happening all the time. And even like two people in the same ethnic group or the same language group, we can have still very different experiences just by, being like two cities apart, or just because, of the other people we might interact with. And the really cool thing I've been sort of learning through costume and stuff is just how um like everything is a product of a multitude of ideas. Like there's no single item that is like one person's sole property or sole idea. Like something like I think a lot of people like will associate beadwork with Zulu people, but that's actually, you find that everywhere, and there's different ways that all the different like tribes and stuff have interacted for it to look that way, even if it is specifically a Zulu style. There's so many other influences that have come into that, and that's actually very interesting and a really great way to kind of understand like even contemporary society now. Like a lot of these things are just always colliding, like a mix of different influences and factors.
Right. Um, you talk about cultural appropriation, like when you talk about Hollywood, especially like the costume making for Star Wars. And ironically enough, I interviewed one of the guests of my channel was the maker of costumes for Star Wars. So it's
Oh my
interesting for
God.
me to, and I'm gonna introduce you to because you're gonna love it, Chad.
Jeez, I love the Star Wars costumes so much. Yo, oh my God, they're so good.
But talk to me about like your discovery of what you found through those costumes.
Yeah. So also, by the way, when I use like cultural appropriation, I mean it kind of neutrally. I don't mean like it's bad or good. I actually like the way they do it. But because I actually only started watching Star Wars when like my partner had shown me like the really nice outfits, and then I was like, oh, this is cool. I want to watch the movies now. And then I got obsessed. I started researching everything. I tried to find like every documentary I could, every interview. And then I was looking at one of Padme's costumes from the prequel series. Who was she played by? Natalie Portman. And I noticed she was wearing iskolo, which is a type of like Zulu headdress we have here. And I was like, yeah, because I was like, that is so familiar. And then I found out that that was actually specifically the costume designer's inspiration. And that's a very interesting item because I think a lot of people when they're doing, I think it's probably one of the most like famous like sort of African symbols. I would
Right.
say like you've seen Beyonce wearing it when she was doing Black as King. They used it a lot in the Black Panther movies. I'm sure there's, I think even Coming to America had them as well. And then it just got me thinking about like, okay, what is like the root of this? Where does this actually come from? And then I discovered that in Congo, there's a Mangbetu tribe, and they used to do the cranial elongation. So that shape that we see now as a hat, they used to do to them like themselves on their skulls, and then they would also braid and weave around it. And then during colonization, this practice was outlawed by the Belgians. And I don't have super confirmation on this, but I think the theory is that basically because it was outlawed, then they moved to making it like something you could put on, like an external shape. And the way these hats started out, they used to be actually woven with like hair, and then also sometimes animal skin, fur, feathers. I think today it's mostly cloth and like beads. And usually, I know like with Zulu people, primarily it's mostly worn by married women, but also like there's different circumstances and stuff. But that was really cool because I love that because I was just watching a silly movie and then I got to go onto this research rabbit hole and like find out all these other cool stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, I love that. That's what sparks your interest, that you just see something and then you're like, well, let me investigate and figure it out. And it was the same thing when you saw a painting and you decided to try the head wrapping that you saw women on the painting have. How did that go? Was that easy to wrap it the same way?
No, that was so difficult because I'm not good at like head wrapping at all. Like I've never been one to do it very often. Mine always come apart or they're always falling off. And especially with that style, it's very built on like height and um there were even other examples I saw that even had like more square boxy shapes and I was just like I don't understand how you like get this together. And I tried to search everywhere for some sort of like tutorial or like instructions. I didn't really find very much. So I was doing a lot of guesswork to try and do that. So I had like I piled like extra hair on my head, and then I put on like a bonnet, and then I put on another scarf, and then I did the actual wrapping to sort of try and achieve that, which I think was close-ish, but like probably could use a little more practice there.
Well, you mentioned that there are no tutorials really of how to do it, and there are not too many books, there is not too much information. Are you thinking of providing this information? Are you thinking of doing those tutorials?
You know what? I would love to. I think I just also get very like a little scared because I don't want to because I know I don't know everything. I'm very worried about like not accurately sharing the right thing, you know what I mean? Like I in my head I'm sure there's someone who knows way more that could do this much better or etc. So I do just like to I'll just share what I do know, but definitely not as like I'm not an academic, I'm not like qualified in any way, I don't have a PhD or something. I'm just a very nosy busybody.
Well, that's
And
how PhDs are born. Like that's the start of it.
yeah, maybe I had the patience for like exams in school, but yeah.
Well, I also see that like what I like about you that you mix and match. You take some contemporary pieces that you buy in a store and then you bring the historic costume into it. How is that exploration going? Like, do you ever feel like those are unmixable? So do you feel like it's part of the evolution of costume?
Yeah, I think for me, it's also part of it. Also goes back to like my like slow fashion and stuff. So as much as I like making a costume, I am very uncomfortable with the idea of I'm gonna make this thing, but it could only exist for like a photo shoot or um going to like Comic Con. You know, I feel like when you make clothing, you should wear it as much as you can. I mean, obviously there are special occasion things that come out once in a while, but I mean, I spend like so many weekends making these things, so it only makes sense that like they have to become a part of my everyday life. Um, and just the kind of person I am, I'm always like a mix of different things, you know, like I'll wear a pretty princess dress, but I have a bunch of tattoos or like that kind of thing. And I like it because it's just something that is distinctly me and it's like my own visual language. And I'm also just one of those people very obsessed with like, I love being different from everyone else. And it's always like a really good conversation starter with someone. It's a great way to make friends because someone wants to go like, what's that about? Like, you know, why are these two things together? And then you get to have like a nice little conversation with someone. So,
Well, I
yeah.
also like that you mix the previous costumes with the new costumes and parts and like bits and pieces, basically. Like you can use the corset from one thing and the blouse from another thing. What do your parents think about all this exploring of fashion?
Oh, I mean, like since I was a child, I've always been a, as my mom would say, I've always been a very funky kid. So for them, it's like, yeah, that's how she's always been. It's not surprising to them. Um, they are very supportive. They're very cool about it. My mom's obviously like, I don't really understand it, but like, you know, you're happy, so that's good with me. My dad thinks it's cool. But also them themselves, they're also very like stylish people, so they get the like the need to like, you know, have your own distinct style or something they've, you know, taught me and my siblings since we were kids. Like it's good to stand out, to have your own unique thing. You know, you don't want to like fit in and be like everyone else.
Well, sometimes when and I'm much older, so like sometimes when I look back at my pictures from whatever 80s, 90s, I'm like, what was I thinking putting that thing on? Do you ever look at your like initial costumes and think like, oh my God, I could do so much better? Or is it part of the your portfolio?
Yeah, you know, part of it is, oh my God, this is but also at the same time, it's like a good I'm learning, you know, I'm growing, I'm expanding. And also the thing I like about clothing is you can always go back to something and fix it, or you can always do something a second time and improve it. You know, that's the other thing as well. And then you can also see your skills like actually living on a garment or an item. But there are definitely a lot of things where I'm just like, I can't believe I thought that fit very well, but it didn't. Or why did I put a zip there? Or like, you know.
Well, how would you approach fit? Like, what's your advice to people who trying to find clothes that fit? So, like, may accommodate themselves. What's your advice on
Yeah, fit's a difficult one. Like, it's something I'm even still sort of grappling with. You know, like there's the whole idea of like what's flattering, and often the idea of what's flattering is just what makes you look thin. You know, so you also have to kind of get past that. Um, I think for me, it's just I've accepted like there's certain shapes I like on myself, and it's just a matter of like how can we get there. So like I'm not someone like I like to emphasize my waist. That's when I feel the most comfortable. I like when clothing is quite tight. For me, I just feel a bit more secure. So it's things like just understanding like what makes sense for what you like to look like and also how you like to live. Like something like I've had to start grappling with is also like I can't wear long skirts all the time. I'm really bad at walking, unfortunately. So that's, you know, something like that. But also the thing that I've actually really enjoyed about historical costumes, especially, is like the emphasis isn't on the size of your body; it's on the shape. And you'll know like they have the corsets and they have the padding and stuff. So it's like when you don't look like the fashionable silhouette right now, you can just build the body you want. It's not a flaw. There's nothing wrong with you. You haven't failed as a person. It's just you just need to like you stuff your bra, or you know you put more petticoats on or something like that. You're just playing with proportions, but there's no reason to like starve yourself or run until you pass out. It's just clothing, like, which is really freeing. It's a nicer way to look at it, I think.
So, where do you see yourself going with all of this? Like, do you think it's going to be a career, full-time design or full-time history, art historian, or like, what's your vision for that or dream?
No, my ultimate dream is like I would love to be like some sort of teacher. I think would be fun. But that's yeah, I don't know. That's still a while away. It's also just a bit difficult because I would always want to stay in South Africa. Like I really love being here and I want to contribute to my country. But like in recent years, a lot of the kind of avenues I would want to look to, like we've a lot of our museums are so underfunded. We've even lost quite a few of them as well, like really important historical sites. There's not a lot of funding in like arts or like any sort of community program. So if it was like a career, if I could try pursue it in any way, like if I wanted to like teach or go do history or even like work in a museum and stuff like that, yeah, the options are getting a lot more limited by the day, unfortunately. Yeah, it's a very tough time now, I think, especially for sort of any arts and museums and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I'd have to just kind of play it by ear. Hopefully, something will come to me. But in the meantime, just like sharing stuff on the internet is pretty fun. I like that; it's cool. But yeah, I don't know. It's very hard to try and imagine a dream without like seeing any examples. I think. Yeah.
Right. Well, what's internet is for you? Like, what's Instagram for you? Social media? What do you get out of it?
For me, a big thing is like I love community. I've gotten to meet so many interesting, like insightful people just through sharing stuff. Especially like on TikTok, there's so many people that like I interact with so often there I will say like, oh, I've been looking at this thing, and someone will come and tell me, oh, you should check this out, or you should check out this research paper, etc. Or we'll just debate about like, oh, maybe we both think this means that. And just being able to like find people who like with similar interests or who are getting where you're coming from is really cool because I don't experience that a lot like in the real world. My friends and people around me are really fantastic, but obviously I've got very niche interests.
Mm.
So the number one thing is definitely just like I just really enjoy engaging with so many different people. Like even I got to come across your channel, amazing, and I get to see other people there, like that kind of thing. So I really enjoy like getting to know people and learning their insight. Like I said, I'm really nosy, so I love to learn. So that's the biggest thing. I love it as a tool for connection. Has been really amazing.
Have there ever been like any negative feeling coming from Instagram?
Oh my God, so much. But so like my actual like day job is I do work in social media, so I'm I'm very cognizant of the fact that there are very dark sides to doing things on the internet. Unfortunately, um, I think high school gave me a lot of practice for dealing with like bullies or like negative comments. Unfortunately, but you know, a lot of things you just have to like, you know, you just kind of sweep it over. Especially because, especially lately, I talk a lot about you know kind of sensitive topics. Like I'll talk about race, I'll talk about slavery, um, which does get certain kind of people riled up. But at the same time, there are way more people who are actually willing to engage in good faith. So even if they don't agree with what I've said, they will still have, you know, a regular conversation with me, or we can debate this nicely. There are other people who are just always going to be mad. You know, there are a subset of people who are very lonely and bitter, and they have a fetish for being yelled at and getting into fights, and I'm not gonna entertain that. And you know, you just move on. Like,
Well, did you learn anything from other people, like when you talk to other people, and let's say you have opposite opinions, do you still learn from them?
yeah, absolutely. I always tell everyone like I'm not afraid to be wrong either. Like I love to be corrected because I would like to say something correctly. I think I'm trying to think of a really recent example where someone actually did correct me on something. Um, I'm forgetting what it was, but it was a big moment where I had to sit and be like, okay, let me get over my sensitivity of like, oh no, I wasn't right, and then actually listen to what they were saying. And I was like, okay, cool. And we had a very nice conversation, and it was like, come out of this better, and like, you know, moving forward, this is how I will speak about A, B, and C, etc. Or
Right.
I'll do more research and stuff, and you know.
Do you ever get frustrated by social media because it's all about the algorithm and the pictures don't work, and now it's reels, and now it's shorts, and now it's the TikTok? Like, do you get frustrated with the fact that like you just want to be an artist and you just want to put your artistic vision there and not jump the hoops of algorithm necessarily?
I used to get very frustrated with it. Like, I think especially when I was a little younger, I used to also just, I think because you're young and you have so many ideas and you're like, oh, I just want people to see what I'm doing, and you have it in your head that it like, like I should be more famous or like more, I should be more popular, etc. Um, but I just also, I think when you make peace with the fact that like the people who need to see something will see it. And for me, I've noticed that as much as things will change with the algorithm, and again, like I said, I work in social media. So like the algorithm's always going to change. At the end of the day, these are corporations. They want to make money. They need the advertiser money, etc. Um, but something that always works out is just making something that's good. If you've made something that's valuable to someone, it might not happen today, unfortunately. Like it might not, but eventually, like, time will show, the proof will be in the pudding. So it's also another aspect of patience, actually, that like maybe right now this thing isn't getting the eyes or the clicks it deserves, but sometime later it will. Like, I think even one of my most popular reels actually was only popular like a month after I posted it. Um, and again, like rather you focus on just making something that's good that someone would watch it a month later, as opposed to like trying to spend all day like making 6-second reels and trying to find trending audios, etc. Just focus on like what you want to do and what you think people would care about seeing, and that's a lot easier. But yeah, very frustrating though. It can be
I
very
mean,
frustrating.
I liked you talked about it on Instagram, and you were saying how if you just concentrate on providing value for your audience, they will respond to that, like algorithm or not. So just concentrate on like what's true to you, right? And I mean, I feel like there is a lot of pressure when you on Instagram or on TikTok to like find your niche, find your target audience. But the reality of it, the audience will find you if you just stay true to yourself.
Literally, yeah. Do you get frustrated by like, because I know the YouTube algorithm has been very crazy for a lot of people lately. Like, does that ever stress you out?
Yes and no, because like I went into this channel for a very selfish reason. Just like you, I was very curious. So I just wanted to get to know all these interesting fiber artists and create these connections. So if somebody is watching it, I'm so happy about it. And if not, then I got to meet you and talk to you and have very interesting conversation. And I'm at peace with that as well.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to like approach it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what's on your work table right now. What are you working on?
Oh, okay. I'm trying to work on my Halloween costume. That's my next big thing. And I'm on a bit of a time crunch there because it is now the middle of October. So I found these old, the original concept art for Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, the original animated movie. And it's her as like a little green fairy, and I thought it was really cute. It's like cottagecore, but Maleficent, and that's one of my favorite Disney movies. And my one friend challenged me to do a villain this year, as opposed to like always gravitating towards the princesses. And then I was like, I'm gonna go find the most princessy version of a villain that I can. Yeah, and then my next project is going to okay, it's actually a little bit Disney princess related, but I was actually a bit upset with the Little Mermaid remake. In terms of, I thought it was very interesting that they chose to set it in the Caribbean, especially with them making the Little Mermaid black. And I thought with like the historical fantasy element, there's so much beautiful like fashion happening, specifically with Afro Caribbean women in that sort of historical time, that I feel like they could have referenced more. But then I also been thinking about any like sort of African mythology around sea creatures, around mermaids. So something I just learned about is, and I don't know how I've never known about this, but it's a Zulu myth. It's called a groetslang, which is like this giant sea snake that has the head of like an elephant and then like the body of a snake something. And I thought it'd be really cool to embroider some of these figures onto what like I would mash up sort of the animated Little Mermaid and then the new Little Mermaid's dresses, and then embroider it with all of this all these motifs from this more African mythology and some of the Afro Caribbean stuff. So that's my next big one. That's probably going to take a really long time, but very excited for that.
Well, you mentioned that like one of your potential dreams is to work in the museum, maybe. Do you ever think about creating pieces that are gonna be museum worthy?
Oh, I would love to. That would be really cool. Someone actually asked me that the other day, like, why don't you put this in a gallery? And I'm like, I don't know. I think for me, like sometimes I'm also like, it's just like me making something in my bedroom, like like a museum's it's so cool and stuff. But yeah, that would be really cool. But I definitely would wanna. I think there's a certain level of skill I still want to reach. Obviously, I know there's no like perfect like amount of perfection, but I definitely like the idea of like spending a good amount of time at least like really working on honing my technique and like my precision and stuff before I would consider that I really want to make something really, really good. Like something where even I go, like I have no notes. Like
Well, when you talk about like fashion designers, they usually think in terms of collections.
mm,
Do you consider your work to be a collection, or do you think of it as separate pieces, unrelated to each other?
that's a good question actually. Actually I think I would think of it as a collection because also part of it is in my head I've kind of been working on building like I want my entire wardrobe for me personally to be everything like self-made. And I have gotten into this idea lately that I really want every single item also to have its own like significant meaning and importance. Like it's not just an item, like it's not just like a t-shirt. Like there's something about the t-shirt that I have done to it that is really significant or interesting or took some sort of effort or skill, like perhaps I tried out a really difficult like crochet stitch or I embroidered something there or my design inspiration was maybe like an old photo of my mother or something like that. Like every item has to be imbued with like meaning and value. So and then I also want these items in my head like they all speak to each other as well. Which is also I also would want it to be able to mix and match them. So even if the projects are very separate, like completely. So like if I take this little mermaid thing, right, and I can mix it with like the red dress I just did, like something like that. Like yes, they're very different, but they are similar. There's like a similar like conversation there happening. So I think I would, yeah, definitely. I think I would think of it as like a collection, it's like a dialogue of sorts, sort of.
Where do you see yourself? Like it's a path, right? And you learn so much through costume. Do you feel like you're still at the beginning of that path, or do you feel like you're somewhere in the center of the path, in the middle of the path?
I think I'm no, I think I'm definitely at the beginning. Every day I'll read something and I'm like, there is just still so much I really don't know. Um, like, and which is really exciting for me. I love it. But yeah, I think I'm definitely not like at the start, but still some. If let's say if it was divided into quarters, I'll say I'm in the second quarter, almost not at the halfway point yet, but like still in the beginning.
Right. I mean, to me, this is like my journey, right? Because the more I meet people, the more I learn about all different cultures and all different fiber arts and like the influences and all these things that's been there for hundreds of years, but I didn't know about them. So I'm so
Hmm.
grateful to meet you in this respect because I've learned so much from you already.
Like yeah, I've learned so much from your channel. Like I'm even like sometimes I have to laser focus. So like right now I'm like, let me just focus on South Africa for now before I get super excited about like the rest of the world. Because there's so many amazing things. And it's so cool how clothing and like fiber arts, like everything, things that we kind of take for granted because we live in them, have so many different connections and histories, and they can teach us so much about different people and different lives, and we get to like just have them with us all the time. It's so enriching. Like
And it's also helps us understand like who we are and where we come from and what influenced us, you know.
yeah, and I love it as like a tool also for like empathy. I think it's so much easier to understand people, even in the way once you start to figure out like the way they think and the things they value. You can start to really empathize with them and you can have care and compassion with them. Really helps humanize people, even though they're so removed from you, or they don't look like you, or they're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. You can really like bond and find connection in this like seemingly normal everyday thing.
Right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Khensani. It's like it was really wonderful to get to know you a little bit better. And I know we'll stay in touch on Instagram after this conversation and we'll continue this conversation. Thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your art with me and my viewers.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so great talking to you.
Thank you.